Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping right into the familiar historical account of Moses and his staff. But look, we're not just rehashing a basic Sunday school story here. As we peel back the layers of this ancient text, we actually discover a highly sophisticated cultural battle. It's this incredible clash of empires, theology, and power, and it is all deeply rooted in the context of ancient Egypt.
At first glance, it just seems like a simple shepherd's tool, right? Literally just a piece of wood. But we're going to see how God took that everyday object and turned it into an absolute weapon of divine authority. A weapon that didn't just perform random magic tricks, but was specifically designed as a targeted, calculated assault on the entire Egyptian worldview.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to hit the reluctant messenger, the signs of authority, the Egyptian magical context, the bridegroom of blood, confronting the Pharaoh, and finally, the hardened heart. All right, Section 1, the reluctant messenger. Our story really kicks into gear with Moses arguing with God at the burning bush. God has just told him to go to Pharaoh and demand the release of the Israelites, and Moses is pushing back hard, specifically complaining about his complete lack of eloquence. There is a deep, almost tragic irony here. Moses flat out confesses he cannot speak well. He literally says he is heavy of mouth. Meanwhile, the Egyptian magicians in the court he's being sent to, they were highly literate practitioners who absolutely prided themselves on being splendid of speech and excellent of words. Moses is basically saying he has zero magical prowess in a world that prized it above literally everything else.
Moses actually pushes back so hard against this calling that God gets angry, and scholars point out this is the very first time in Scripture where God is explicitly said to get angry at an individual. And there are massive permanent consequences, for sure. Because of this reluctance, Moses permanently loses the high priesthood to his older brother Aaron. The Levite priesthood will go through Aaron's line from then on, not Moses.
Moving to Section 2, signs of divine authority. To equip Moses for this absolutely terrifying task, God doesn't just hand him some comforting words. He gives him tangible, undeniable proof. He equips Moses with an arsenal of 3 highly specific signs to prove his divine backing. First, turning his shepherd's staff into a snake. Second, making his hand leprous and then instantly healing it. And third, turning the water of the Nile into blood. But keep in mind, these aren't just random parlor tricks. Which brings us to Section 3, the Egyptian magical context. This is where things get genuinely fascinating. These signs, especially the staff, were a direct, calculated polemic against Egyptian cosmic beliefs. Every single action was designed to speak the language of Egyptian magic, but with a clear message of ultimate supremacy. Moses isn't just pulling off some standard snake charming trick. See, the classic Egyptian move was to pinch a nerve on a real snake's neck to temporarily paralyze it, making it look like a stiff wooden staff. But God totally reverses it. He has Moses take a lifeless piece of wood and turn it into a living snake. It's a profound display of actual creation, not just cheap manipulation. And check this out. The Hebrew text actually changes the word used for the snake from earlier chapters. When they are standing right before Pharaoh, the word used is tanin. This elevates the whole event from a simple biological change straight into a cosmic battle. In Egypt, the tanin represented Apophis, the giant serpent enemy of their sun god Ra. God is basically declaring war on the gods of Egypt right there on the throne room floor. And that brings up a brilliant little detail. Remember when God told Moses to grab the snake by the tail instead of the head? Now, to you and me, that sounds incredibly dangerous, right? But in Egyptian magic, grabbing a hostile creature by the tail was the ultimate flex. It proved you had completely harnessed and dominated those hostile forces of nature. God was showing the Egyptian court that he completely controlled their most feared cosmic monsters. Then comes the ultimate insult. Aaron's staff, having become a serpent, actually swallows the staffs of the Egyptian magicians. In the Egyptian magical world, swallowing wasn't just about eating. It meant you were completely absorbing your opponent's power, authority, and knowledge. By devouring their staffs, the staff of God signaled the absolute death knell to the conjurer's abilities. Their power was just gone, consumed. Even that third sign, pouring out the water to turn it into blood, was a total insider move. By pouring water onto the dry ground, Moses would have looked exactly like an Egyptian funerary priest, whose literal title, by the way, meant water pourer. It's incredible. Instead of performing a ritual for the dead, Moses takes their tools of creative magic and turns them into a hostile swarm of blood against the living. He is completely subverting their religious system. Okay, Section 4, the bridegroom of blood. Right before Moses even reaches Pharaoh, we hit one of the most bizarre and honestly confusing crisis points in the entire text.
This happens while Moses is traveling back to Egypt with his family.
In a totally shocking twist, the text says God meets Moses at a lodging place and actually seeks to put him to death. Why? Because Moses, the very guy chosen to lead the covenant people, had failed to keep the covenant himself by not circumcising his son. His wife Zipporah sees the divine wrath descending, rapidly performs the rite with a flint knife, and touches the blood to Moses' feet. Only then does God back off. In the middle of this chaos, Zipporah cries out that Moses is a bridegroom of blood. Scholars think this phrase is a sort of ancient linguistic fossil. Basically, shedding this firstborn son's blood acted as an atoning, protective sign against the plague of divine death. The amazing takeaway here is how perfectly this anticipates the upcoming Passover, where the blood of a lamb on the doorposts will protect the Israelites. It shows that God's holiness demands obedience even from his hand-picked leader.
All right, Section 5, Confronting the Pharaoh. With his life spared, the covenant honored, and his authority firmly established through the staff, Moses finally arrives in Egypt. He and Aaron stand face to face with the most powerful man on earth.
And Pharaoh's response is just dripping with arrogance. Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? You've got to remember, Pharaoh was considered a literal living god, the incarnation of the sun god Ra. He flatly rejects Moses, claiming total ignorance of the Hebrew God. To him, Yahweh is a total nobody.
So Pharaoh doesn't just say no, he hits back hard. He views the Hebrews as totally expendable laborers. To completely crush their spirits and stomp out any hope of rebellion, he demands they meet their impossible daily brick quotas, but abruptly cuts off their straw supply. They have to go find it themselves. The immediate result is just brutal suffering and violence for the Israelites.
Which leads us to Section 6, the hardened heart. Pharaoh has drawn his line in the sand, the staff is deployed, the plagues begin, and this horrific battle of wills takes center stage.
As things escalate, the text repeatedly says Pharaoh's heart was hardened. But it's actually not just one word. The author uses 3 distinct Hebrew roots here: kabed, kasha, and hazak. These words mean heavy, difficult, and strong. Put them together, and this showcases a state of absolute moral degeneracy. Pharaoh's heart is totally unresponsive to reason, completely devoid of compassion, and locked in this arrogant defiance.
So the absolutely brilliant literary contrast here is something you don't want to miss. Back at the beginning, Moses uses the word heavy, kabed, to describe his inability to speak. Now that exact same word, kabed, is used to describe Pharaoh's inability to see the truth. Moses had a heavy mouth, but he obeyed. Pharaoh has a heavy heart, and it literally destroys his entire empire.
When you realize this isn't just a basic story about a shepherd doing a magic trick with a stick, but a calculated dismantling of an entire empire's worldview, it literally changes everything. God was speaking a language the Egyptians understood perfectly, using a simple staff to swallow their power and prove his absolute sovereignty. It leaves us with a pretty profound question. What other historical texts are hiding these incredible layers of insider knowledge just waiting to be decoded? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history you think you know.